You've probably heard the term REST API thrown around in meetings or tech articles and just kind of nodded along, right? Well, you're definitely not alone. It's one of those foundational concepts in the tech world, and today we're going to pull back the curtain and break down what it really means in a way that actually clicks.
So, just think about it for a sec. When you open your weather app and it magically knows the forecast, how does that happen? Or when you're scrolling through a food delivery app, how does it get that up-to-the-minute list of restaurants? It's not magic, I promise you. It's all happening through APIs. The absolute best way to understand an API is to think about ordering food at a restaurant. So you're the customer or the client, and you have a need, right? You're hungry. So you look at the menu. That menu, that's basically the API. It tells you exactly what's available. You give your order to the waiter. That's you making an API call. The kitchen, which is the server, does all the hard work, and then finally, the waiter brings your food back to you. That's the API response. It's really that simple. That little back-and-forth conversation powers so much of what we do online.
Okay, so where does the REST part come in? REST, which stands for Representational State Transfer, isn't some piece of software you install. It's a set of rules, a style guide. Think of it like the standard operating procedure that makes a good restaurant run smoothly. There's a proper way to write the menu, a right way to take an order. Those rules make sure everything is predictable and super efficient.
So let's dive a little deeper into the actual rules of this digital restaurant. There are 4 main principles that really define what makes an API RESTful.
First up, everything is treated as a resource. Whether it's a user's profile or a specific product, it gets its own unique web address. Second, you can only interact with those resources using a very specific, limited set of commands or operations. Third, the information you get back can be in a bunch of different formats, but JSON is super popular because it's so easy for both humans and computers to read. And finally, and this one's really important, the communication is stateless. We'll get to exactly what that means in a minute.
And here's where it gets really elegant. Those standard operations, they map perfectly back to our restaurant. A GET request is just you asking for your food. POST is when you place a totally new order. PUT, that's like flagging down the waiter to change something you already ordered. And delete is, well, you guessed it, canceling the order. The simple vocabulary is what makes REST so incredibly powerful and universal.
Okay, so back to that word, stateless. What does it mean? Imagine you're at a super busy coffee shop. You order a latte, you get it, you walk away. If you get back in line 5 minutes later, the cashier has no idea who you are or what you ordered before. You have to start the whole process over. That's exactly how a REST API works. The server has short-term memory loss. On purpose. It forgets about you the second it's done. Every single request has to include all the info needed to be understood on its own.
So, we know what REST is and how it works. But the real question is why? Why did this particular set of rules become the undisputed champion for building web services? Well, it turns out following these rules gives developers some amazing advantages.
To really appreciate REST, you gotta know what came before it, an older standard called SOAP. Now think of SOAP as a big, slow German shepherd carrying around a heavy backpack full of rules and extra stuff. A REST API, on the other hand, is like a fast, nimble German shepherd with no baggage. It's lightweight, it's quick, and it's just perfect for things like mobile apps where speed is everything. And that lean, nimble approach gives us some huge wins. First, you get what's called loose coupling. This just means the app and the server aren't tied together so tightly, so you can make changes to the API without breaking every single app that uses it. It's also super flexible, especially with its support for JSON. And all of that adds up to a huge boost in performance, which means faster, snappier experiences for you, the user.
All right, get ready for a term that sounds way more complicated than it actually is. Ready? Hypermedia as the engine of application state. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful. That's why most people just call it Helios.
But here's the secret. Despite that crazy name, the idea behind it is incredibly simple and, well, beautiful. It means that when a true REST API gives you a piece of data, it also gives you links telling you what you can do next. It's like a choose-your-own-adventure for apps. The API literally guides the developer along so they don't need a static, rigid instruction manual. It's self-discoverable.
Okay, that's enough theory. Let's get practical. How do people actually use these things day to day? It really boils down to 3 main activities: consuming APIs, creating them, and, of course, documenting them. First, consuming an API. This is what most apps are doing. They're the customer in the restaurant. They make a GET request to a server to pull in some data.
A perfect little example is an app that has a single button, and every time you press it, it calls an API to fetch a new, nerdy programming joke. The app is consuming the data that the joke API provides. Then there's the flip side, creating an API. This is when you're the one running the kitchen. Let's say your company has an internal database for tracking support tickets. A developer could use a tool like Spring Data REST to quickly build an API on top of that database. That way, other internal tools, maybe a data dashboard, can easily access that ticketing information. You're sharing your data out to the world.
And finally, and this is so important, you have to document your API. I mean, if the API is the menu, you need to write it down so people can read it, right? That's where tools like Swagger come in. They are amazing. They can automatically generate this beautiful, interactive website that shows other developers every single dish on your menu, all the operations they can use, and even lets them try things out right there in the browser.
So let's just tie this all together. At the end of the day, REST isn't magic. It's just a really smart set of design rules, our restaurant menu, that keeps the digital world talking in a simple, predictable way. By being stateless and using just a few basic commands, it creates a system that is incredibly flexible, light, and fast. And that right there is why it's the invisible engine powering the apps you use every single day. When you think about it, everything from our smart homes to the latest AI models needs a way for different systems to talk to each other. REST is the language they're all learning to speak. So that kind of leaves us with a final question to chew on. As our world gets more and more connected, what amazing new things are going to be possible, all thanks to these simple, powerful rules of connection?